Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Eclectic Reader. So I am doing my April monthly reading wrap-up. In the month of April, I finished 5 books. And for the most part, these were really fun books. I had a great time. Only one of the books was particularly memorable, but I do look forward to reading other books in the series that I started this month. So it was a great reading month. I read some cozies. I read one work of historical fantasy. It's also kind of literary fiction at the same time. I did read an academic book that I'm not going to talk about here. It was a book on Cicero because I work on the Renaissance and there are a lot of references to Cicero in Renaissance literature. I'm not going to talk about this book here because you wouldn't even be able to find it. It is an academic book. So I actually technically read 6 books. I also read 2 works of middle grade that also are fantasy. So I had a great reading month. So the first book that I finished in April was The Golem and the Ginny by Helene Wecker. Now this is a book that I did an entire review video for, so I will link that down below. But suffice it to say that this was one of my favorite books that I have read so far in 2022. This is a work of historical fantasy set at the turn of the 20th century. It deals with immigration, but it also deals with some magical creatures who are trying to figure out what it means to be human. So they're trying to figure out what it means to be American and also what it means to be human. So we follow 2 creatures, the first being a golem, which is a creature of clay. She goes by the name of Chava. And she's created by a rabbi before her master comes to Ellis Island. Before he arrives in Ellis Island, however, he dies. Now, the golem had been programmed to obey her master's every whim and desire. But now that he has died, she suddenly gets this feeling that she needs to fulfill the desires of all of the people around her. So Chava then gets found by another rabbi in New York. And she starts living with him, learning how to act more human. She never goes to sleep. She passes as human in many ways, a very exceptional human at that. She can bake almost perfectly, and so she gets a job at a bakery. But she has this secret, and it's really hard for her to hide the fact that she is a golem. And the rabbi knows. He knows her secret, and he tries to help her fit in this human world in America. And the second creature is a Ginny. Now, a Ginny is not created. A Ginny can live for thousands of years. Unfortunately, our Ginny was trapped by a wizard in a bottle almost 600 years before in the desert of Syria. He has a past that we learn more about as the story goes along. He is liberated from the kettle where he was imprisoned in a tinsmith's shop. And the tinsmith takes him in and allows him to work for him as an apprentice. And he gets the name Ahmad. So Ahmad and Chava do come to meet each other and they become somewhat friends. But Chava and Ahmad have such different ways of thinking about the world. Where Chava has been programmed to obey everyone's needs, everyone's desires, Ahmad is not used to obeying anybody. And so he does things that we would consider unethical, wrong, illegal. And yet Ahmad doesn't have the same sense of right and wrong that humans do. If you're someone who doesn't particularly like fantasy, but you do like literary fiction, I think you will really like this book. On the flip side, if you're someone who already enjoys fantasy like I do, you will really love this book. This is definitely a fantasy book with a lot of emphasis on character development. And I really like the ethical questions that it engages with, as well as some of the political issues of the early 20th century, such as immigration and questions of integration and, finding your community and conflicts between communities in New York City. There are different ethnic communities represented here. There is a Byzantine Catholic community, there's a Jewish community. There are a lot of different communities here that are forced to live somewhat side by side. And now Chava and Ahmad threaten to destabilize these communities or to express some of the conflicts that are already there within these communities. This also is a book that deals with gender and women's freedom. So there are a lot of different themes engaged in this book. It is a long book. I started it in February, but like I said, it was brilliant. I loved the writing. I love the characters, and I couldn't more highly recommend it. The second book that I finished was Evangeline of the Bayou by Jan Eldridge. Now, this is a middle grade fantasy novel, so fantasy, but middle grade, following Evangeline, who lives in the Bayou in Louisiana with her grandmother. And she is a huntress in training. So her job is to banish demons from people's homes. And her grandmother has been leading the way in banishing demons for the last so many decades. Evangeline is learning from her grandmother how to do this. One day, Evangeline and her grandmother are called to New Orleans. So they are forced to go to this large city to deal with a woman who has been possessed by some kind of a demon. She is ill. And Evangeline and her grandmother have to figure out how to liberate this demon from this woman. Now, this story is also a coming of age story for Evangeline, who feels like she's supposed to know who her familiar is. So a huntress has a familiar, and she is trying to figure out who that familiar is for her. And no creature has come her way, at least no benevolent creature. There does seem to be a creature following her, and she has been trying to get rid of it ever since she left the bayou. I did enjoy the story. I learned a lot about the folklore in this region. It was fun. I did wish, however, that we got to know more about the boy that lives in this house. This boy is named Julian, and he has some peculiarities that get on Evangeline's nerves. And based on how Julian is depicted, I got this impression that he's supposed to be autistic. And for that reason, I felt like maybe the representation of disability in this story wasn't very good. Evangeline is constantly irritated by Julian's interests. She's telling Julian what to do. And while he has these special interests, she never really shares them. She's not interested in entertaining them. And I just felt like Julian is just being presented as this irritating kid. I hope that in the future books, Julian gets more of a voice and that Evangeline learns how to be a better friend. So that was ultimately the reason why I gave this book 3.5 stars. I just felt like the representation of what I felt was supposed to be autism wasn't very positive. My third book that I read was another middle grade. This is Ragweed and Poppy, which is book 7 of the Dimwood Forest series by Avi and illustrated by Brian Floca. Now I'm going to include some illustrations here. The reason why I decided to read this book was the illustrations. Brian Floca wrote a book called Locomotive, which I read some years ago. It is a picture book about the history of locomotion and railways in the United States. And I just absolutely love his art style. I've also read Crispin and the Cross of Lead by Avi, and I really enjoyed that. So I thought this brings together two authors whose works I have enjoyed. And this book did not let me down. I had a lot of fun. It is a very simple story about Ragweed, who is a mouse. This is the 7th book in the series. I've never read the other books, so maybe there's more backstory that I'm missing. But at the beginning of the story, he's leaving this large city for the forest where he'd like to live. And while he's on the train, a raccoon named Lotar, he's this baby raccoon, ends up in the train, and then he wants to return to his mother. And Ragweed, who's kind of a selfish mouse, doesn't really want to help him, but decides, okay, let's go help him. At least I'll be able to visit the forest at the same time. Unfortunately, once he reconciles the raccoon with his mother, the mother is not so pleased and chases Ragweed away. And then Ragweed chances upon Poppy, who is another mouse, but of a different race, basically. And she is caught in a trap and she can't get out of the trap. You know, we follow their adventures. I had a good time. I did feel, though, that a lot of the adventures were repetitious, so there was a certain event that kept happening over and over again, with slight differences each time. And after the second or third time, I was kind of over it. I was like, we need to have a different storyline here. So I think that was ultimately the reason why I gave it 4 stars and not 5. Otherwise, it was a really fun book. The illustrations were delightful. And, you know, this is wonderful for early readers, or a great book to read to children because of the illustrations. The 4th book that I finished is The Big Chili by Julia Buckley. The Big Chili is the first book in the Undercover Dish mystery series. And I read this for the Protagonist Book Club for April. And this story follows Lila Drake, who is basically a ghost cook. So she makes really delicious meals for people who want to present these meals as if they had made them themselves. So she cannot reveal her identity. She makes the dishes, she gives them to people who can't cook themselves, or they can't cook as well, or maybe they're elderly and they're not able to get around as well or cook the meals that they used to be able to cook, but they still want to give the appearance of being great cooks. And so she makes dishes for them, charges $50 a dish, and then these clients present the dishes as if they're their own dishes. And so one day, Lila makes a dish for a client of hers named Pet, who is very involved in her church, and she is known for her chilies. Now, of course, she doesn't make the chili. It's Lila who makes the chili, and Pet just pretends that this is her chili. Now, Pet is offering this chili at her church's bingo night, and Lila and her mother, who aren't particularly involved in the church in other ways, do attend the bingo night. And on the day, however, the woman who is kind of the self-styled leader of the social events at the church and kind of gets involved in everything, takes the first bite of the chili and drops dead. Now, Lila feels horrible because she's like, wait, where did this come from? It is my chili. I need to take responsibility for this. But Pet, who has an image to preserve, has to pretend that it is her chili, and she insists, no, this is my chili, I'm gonna take ownership for it. And so, of course, now Pet becomes a suspect. But Lila is dealing with this ethical dilemma, like, should I tell the detective, whom she's also interested in other ways, should I tell him that I'm the one who made the chili? But also, who poisoned my chili? I definitely did not. And she doesn't think that Pet did. So this is kind of a locked room mystery. And I really liked how it was written. It was definitely very engaging. I thought the characters were particularly compelling. I really love the sleuth's job of being an undercover chef. I thought that that was really clever and really quirky. However, there are 2 pet peeves of mine in this book. The first is the police officer love interest, which I don't care about. There's just such a conflict of interest there. If the police officer is dating the sleuth and asking the sleuth to give him information, and if the officer tells the sleuth things that he shouldn't. So I'm not particularly interested in that. It's also just a trope that's just overdone, in my opinion, in the cozy genre. And the second one is just that I felt that the reveal wasn't very satisfying. I didn't see how the killer... I didn't see it coming, and I didn't see it coming not in a good way. Like, I just felt like it wasn't a very satisfying ending. I don't want to reveal too much more. However, because I really like Lila, and I really like the community in which this story takes place, I am willing to continue with the series, and I ultimately gave it 3.5 stars. And the 5th book is a book that I actually finished on May 1st, but I'm going to count it for April, is Death by Dumpling by Vivian Chen. So, the draw of this book. It takes place in Northeast Ohio. If you've been following me, you know that I am from Northeast Ohio, and I will read any book that's set in Northeast Ohio, or at least attempt to. There was a book that I tried to read last month, and it was set in Northeast Ohio in an ice cream shop, and it was not good. So I actually DNF'd that book. I will put it on the screen. I forget the title. But this one was fantastic. Death by Dumpling takes place in an Asian restaurant It's called The Holy Noodle House, and our sleuth is Lana Lee. Lana Lee is of Taiwanese and British descent. Her mother is Taiwanese and her father is British, and she helps her mother out now that she has quit her job, and she's also dumped a boyfriend who was Italian and evidently quite good looking and a good chef, but also cheated on her. So she's just gotten out of a bad relationship and she's just quit her job without really a backup plan, but now she's working for her mother. One day, she is asked to deliver dumplings to the property manager named Mr. Fang. So Mr. Fang owns all of the buildings in this one area, and the restaurant is one of those buildings. He often orders dumplings, and so this time it's her turn to deliver the dumplings, and then he's found dead, poisoned by the dumplings she delivered. Now, Mr. Fang had a partner who was also in the business with him, and so he is one of the suspects. The other suspect, of course, is Lana herself. And then there's this other woman, this young lady who was very angry at Mr. Fang because rumors are that he was going to raise the property rent. And she was very upset because she knew that her mother was really struggling to make ends meet. And she was screaming at him shortly before he was found dead. So now Lana suspects that maybe this girl is the killer. This was a really fun book. I love the reveal. I did one of the storylines I was able to figure out. I was able to figure out one of the characters involved. Not the killer, but one of the characters involved in the whole story here. And it was in a good way. I didn't feel that this was a bad mystery, even though I love being able to guess the mystery to some degree. So I really like that. And I just thought that this was a wonderful story, and I 100% will be continuing with the story in the next couple months. I really look forward to learning more about Lana and seeing what happens to her, you know, what happens with her job, with her friendship. She has a friend who works at a bar, and that friend is also her roommate, and they have a wonderful rapport. They kind of team together to figure out who killed Mr. Fang. So I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. So these are all of the books that I read in the month of April. Let me know if you read any of these books, and I will be making a video soon about the books that I plan to read in May, particularly the cozies that I'm excited to read. I have a lot of cozies out from the library, and I really look forward to reading a lot more cozies. I'm still trying to get through The Godfather by Mario Puzo, which is not at all a cozy, and I'm having a lot of difficulties pushing through the blatant misogyny in this book. We'll see. I will definitely be talking about this book in my May wrap-up, but I am struggling a bit with it at the moment, trying to push through it. I think for the most part, I prefer the film to the book, at least so far. We'll see. We'll see. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and if you're new here, I hope that you stick around and subscribe. Thank you, everybody. Bye now.